This is Double Take. I remember sitting down and being like really enthralled in this story.
You needlessly endangered this boat and its crew.
It's one of the films that actually focuses on a moment in women's history. The clock is ticking.
I want my men off this boat.
An iconic women's cast.
Let's make a spectacle of our own.
That's the choice we should be making as storytellers. Hey, I'm Kathryn Corcoran. I am an actress, producer, writer, and you may know me from my work on screen in films like Terrifier, Return to Newcomb High, and on TV shows like Gossip Girl and The Good Wife. And I've been very privileged to be chosen for Women's History Month to cover some iconic films in the Shout catalog, including my two selected films, K-19, The Widowmaker by the incredible Kathryn Bigelow, and Misbehaviour by Philippa Lowthorpe. Our first film of the evening is K-19, The Widowmaker. It was directed by the incomparable Kathryn Bigelow, and it stars Harrison Ford and Liam Neeson. It is based on a real-life event that could have been World War III, which feels very apt considering the climate. And it's based on a true story about a Russian submarine that was placed in opposition and in response to U.S. military forces. And there was actually a crisis on board that would have resulted, if the ship had exploded, it would have resulted in a nuclear catastrophe. Obviously, it's directed by Kathryn Bigelow. Kathryn Bigelow is incredible, not only because of the films that she makes, but she is the first woman to ever win the Academy Award for Best Director. She, time and time again, tackles subject matter that is traditionally reserved for male directors. She is not afraid to tackle historical content, war-driven content with strong male protagonists. And she does it in a way that is so realistic and raw, and she really prides herself on that. In the making of K-19, The Widowmaker, for example, she put the entire cast through actual military evacuation drills to enhance the realism of the film. And she also made a point to cast internationally. So while she had these big blockbuster A-listers, at the helm of her film, she intentionally made sure the rest of the crew on board this vessel were an international crew people the way they probably would have at the time. And she's a powerhouse and an icon, and you can't talk about Women's History Month in film without talking about Kathryn Bigelow. I'm Kathryn Corcoran, and this is K-19, The Widowmaker. A lot of the films that I've gotten into and my passion for cinema has come through my father. And I did not know when I watched K-19 who Kathryn Bigelow was the first time I saw it on. My dad was watching it, and I just kind of sat down with him. I had seen Indiana Jones. I recognized this actor, and so I watched it. He was a big history person, and I don't even know, honestly, if my dad knew that it was a woman director. At that time, and even now, there were not women directing films like this. They were not given the opportunity to do these giant blockbusters. And so, sitting down with him, and maybe him not even knowing, and then doing the deep dive on the film like we always did, we'd watch the special features, because the time when you would get the physical media and put it in and watch all that, and realizing that this was a woman, and another Kathryn, frankly. As a kid, that was just the coolest thing. To see these military-style stories told from a female's perspective, but through the lens of a male protagonist, just shows that we are all human beings, and the human condition is universal. The thing that's really, really cool about Kathryn Bigelow is she adds to this level of realism. In K-19, she does it through the immersive experiences that she puts the cast through. She makes a point to shoot the film on multiple continents, the way this actual vessel would have been shot. And you feel the tension and the intimacy because the entire cast and crew have gone through these military-style trainings that the Russian army would have gone through. And so you understand kind of the experience. And they feel it. You feel what their stress, because they know what the stress is, and you see it on the screen. What's so cool about Kathryn Bigelow is like, this is not what she won the Academy Award for. This is kind of a precursor to that though, because it is a military style story. She goes on to win the Academy Award for The Hurt Locker, which is another military story about the Iraq War and Afghanistan presence. And it's her first film in 7 years, and it's her ex-husband, James Cameron's first film in 12 years, Avatar, and she wins. And it's just like, it's such a like incredible thing. You've got these two greats going up against each other, and arguably against one of the most influential films of the 21st century. And yet her ability to tell authentic action, military-driven stories is the one that perseveres. And I just like, she's such an icon. And frankly, I don't know why we're not allowing women still after all of this to direct these types of films, because Kathryn Bigelow wrote the textbook for that. I think Kathryn's importance to cinema obviously is in being the first of anything, right? When you're the first of something, you set the precedent going forward. And that's why representation on screen is so important, right? Because the first time you see someone do something that they say is impossible or has never been done before, it opens the door for other people to do the same. Without Kathryn Bigelow, we wouldn't have directors like Chloe Zhao. We wouldn't have Greta Gerwig. All of these things wouldn't happen because there was no representation for that. So that's the first thing that she's done, is just in being the first. But the other thing that she's done is kind of equal the playing field in terms of the types of stories you can tell as a woman in this world. This is like a precursor to things like you see it in the superhero space, where Wonder Woman is this huge box office hit, and nobody will make live action Wonder Woman up until that point. And like that wouldn't happen if Kathryn Bigelow hadn't tackled the military space. And even you see things like, everyone's like, oh, nobody will go see a film about a Barbie. That is not true. And I think that's where her power is that she's laid the groundwork for other, not only female directors, but female-driven stories to take front and center and to have the budgets and the box office presence that they deserve. Even though, it was released years ago, and even though that it's a historical piece that is not modern, Russia is a very topical conversation in the socio-political sphere right now. And so to kind of have an understanding of the historical context that set us to where we are, I think is not only illuminating, but you also see how cycles repeat themselves. It also checks a really interesting box for people who just like to challenge characters, because Harrison Ford, up until that character, is really kind of the everyman. He's Indiana Jones. That is his most famous character. That is, the all-American guy. And he takes on this Russian officer who is not the kindest, And honestly, at that time, this is not something we do as much anymore, but at that time in cinema, wrongly so, international characters were the villains. If you had an Eastern European accent in the 80s and 90s, you were the villain. It didn't matter about the context or what you had actually done in the story. And Harrison Ford takes that character, boldly portrays him, and he's complex and layered, and he is not this stereotypical racist villain. He is this man who is desperately trying to save his crew and ultimately the world from World War III and a nuclear explosion. He's hard, and just like human beings, we have these layered flaws. He's an imperfect hero. I think obviously as it starts to fill with water and the structures on there, that's full that's the era of Titanic and things like that. But that already is that's the tension right there. And that feeling. Everyone knows that feeling to be on a ride and the water is coming up. Everybody knows what that feels like. Everyone knows the feeling of fear in that. So I think that that in it, and the score in it really builds and swells in a way that feels very Jaws adjacent.
120 meters. 110 meters.
Low main ballast.
So that I recognize that in my dad watching these films for sure. Name another film where you've got Harrison Ford and Liam Neeson on screen at the same time together. You've got your full action suspense. Like, now you've got Liam Neeson, like, you have my daughter and you will not live, you know? And like, this is like prime setup for that. I also think it's an interesting, like, kind of false protagonist switch, because it starts with Liam Neeson as the captain of the ship, but then pivots and he's replaced by Harrison Ford. And I think that's a really interesting cinematic choice, even though maybe historically accurate, that you don't see that as something that happens very often. And when it does happen, it's kind of reserved for like the genre space. That's something you see in Scream, you know, that this idea that like you think you're going to be on this journey with one actor and you end up being on the journey with the other. And I think that's a really interesting cinematic choice that also keeps you on the edge of your seat, because the elimination of the person you're emotionally attached to is such a like jarring experience, you know? I think when something doesn't perform at the box office, there's a lot of factors that go into play. The idea that it's one thing, it's one actor's performance, it's the direct, like there's so many things that go into box office success. Dates, times, what else is being released, weather, you know, there's so much that goes into it that I think to blame the initial box office numbers on Harrison Ford's casting is just not thought through. However, I do think as a populace, we tend to like to put people in boxes. We tend to like to go, no, this is what they do and that's it. You know, this is our superstar. This is our movie star, our hero, our all-American guy. We can't possibly put him in the role of an Eastern European character that we've racially villainized for years. No, we can't do that. I come up against it in my own career. This is a horror actress. We can't possibly put her in a comedy. We can't possibly try to put her in a serious drama. We can't possibly have her do theater. Doesn't matter if she's Shakespeare trained. Doesn't matter. You know, this idea that like we are in this box, and it's so interesting. I think it makes perfect sense that Kathryn Bigelow would cast him in this, because Kathryn Bigelow is a woman in this industry who is put in a box and told, these are the films you have to make. And she's saying, I'm going to make the complete opposite of that. And I think that's the choices we should be making as storytellers. We should constantly be flipping the script. We should constantly be challenging what's in front of us. We should constantly be making people uncomfortable and think about things. Tonight's second film is Misbehaviour by Philippa Lowthorpe, and it is also based on real events, but this time following not only a female-driven story and characters, but based on a real moment in women's history and the story of the women's liberation movement in the UK and its impact around the Miss World competition in the 70s. I'm Kathryn Corcoran, and this is Misbehaviour. Misbehaviour is kind of perfect for Women's History Month because it's one of the films that actually focuses on an actual moment in women's history, in addition to being directed by a female director, by a woman director, and starring an iconic, oh my God, women's cast. You have obviously Keira Knightley helming it, but then you also have Emma Darcy, pre-House of the Dragon. You have Gugu Mbatha-Raw in this. It's just, I think it also has Suki Waterhouse. I mean, the cast is unreal, but the women's liberation movement was incredibly influential, not only as a movement for women's rights in the United Kingdom, but also for women's entertainment. You know, the idea of beauty pageants and the Miss World competition was the thing that kicked off the women's liberation movement, and it was around a giant internationally televised event and competition around women's beauty standards hosted by Bob Hope. So it's not only a film that directly portrays a real event in women's history, but in media and women's cinema. I think now is the right time for a film like this to be released because we're dealing with, at least in the United States, but all over the world, we're seeing this kind of conservative pushback culturally where women's rights are being challenged and policies and access to things like healthcare and no-fault divorces are being revoked. And I think now more than ever, the idea of kind of the people standing up and making the change that they want to see in the world is more important than ever before. So I think this is the perfect film, not only for Women's History Month, but for right now. I think it's a really powerful message to be able to get a cast like this for a film like this, because if you look at, and again, Philippa Lowthorpe was directing quite a bit. This was not her first film by any stretch, and this was not even necessarily an indie film by any stretch. This had a substantial budget. However, the star power that came out to be a part of this is really, really telling, not just because you have someone like Keira Knightley, who is obviously a household name, but you have these actors who are just masters of their craft. And actually, this came out during the pandemic in 2020, prior to them really seeing the renaissance that they have had in their careers, So you see an actor like Emma Darcy in this, and now Emma Darcy is the Dragon Queen, and I think it makes perfect sense that you would see them in 2020 before House of the Dragon, and now seeing them as the Dragon Warrior themselves, because they are. One of the things that I loved about this film in particular is how it shows the layers of feminism and the feminist movement. I think one of the things that the film does really well is talk about the complexities of privilege. You kind of have these like converging narratives coming to place throughout the film. You have obviously the story of the group of people, the kind of like vigilante crew that become the women's lib, but then you also have the participants in this beauty pageant who come from all over the world. And one of the other like kind of subplots within the story is how at that time in South Africa, there were 2 contestants being entered because of the racial political tensions that were happening there. You have the white beauty queen, who is the Dutch colonizer descent, and then you have the actual Black South African woman. And the interviewers start to ask these women about what it means that they're standing next to each other, what it means to them that there's 2 of them, if they even like that at all, if they think that's representative of their country, and they're immediately pulled out of that and told not to comment on it. And it's such a layered kind of commentary on the idea that we as entertainers can't possibly be communicating anything. We're just here to kind of dance and not actually say anything with our stories, but you're not supposed to have socio-political value. But it's also kind of a commentary on the idea of women being seen and not heard, looking like they're an image for something, but not saying anything. The other thing that it does, which I think is so beautiful, is the scene towards the end of the film after the women's liberation movement has infiltrated the taping of the Miss World pageant. The thing is the woman who wins is the Black South African woman. And that what they don't realize as a group of white women is what it meant for that character as a Black woman to win the contest. And she has this moment where she says this was going to change things. This was the first time little girls were going to see someone who looked like them on television being told they were beautiful, and you just took that away. And there's this moment that Keira Knightley's character has where she realizes that privilege is layered. I can not have privilege as a woman in media because I am a woman in a field that is largely male dominated. I can experience lack of privilege there, but also experience privilege in the fact that I am not a Black woman. I am not an Indigenous woman. All of these things, privilege is not is very literally not black and white and is very literally layered. And a lot of times in activism, we tend to be blinded by the idea of that our perspective is the only perspective, especially as white people. And I think that's what the film really captures very, very well. And when they all kind of converge in this moment of the telecast, you realize that everybody's perspective is both important and valuable and also tragically flawed. And it is such a powerful moment of understanding that revolution looks different to the revolutionary. Is that all right? Did that work? Okay, cool. This is so great. I love this. There needs to be more stuff like this. I don't know if I can say badass on here, but I think that's badass. That's it.